Tonight on Dragon Ball Discussions, we will see which overpowered ability is better than the other. First, the power to create anything versus the ability to turn anything into anything else. Hi, I'm your host, Jet Black, and let's explore the materialization sorcery versus the transfiguration beam. So, looking at the special attack dictionary, materialization sorcery is essentially an art where they can materialize an object that they picture by thinking hard. So you just have to like picture it in your mind, and then poof, it's a thing. And it's essentially them being able to create anything that they imagine. They do emphasize that it is an object, and if we wanted to get super specific with that, an object is a material thing that can be seen and touched. So if we really wanted to limit them based off of like the Google definition for the materialization sorcery, then we can argue that you can't make invisible things because you can't picture nothing. But I feel like that's arguable. And then if we also go by the Google definition, it has to be something that you can touch. So they also can't visualize something intangible for some reason. But I honestly feel like that's a little ridiculous. It seems like they can essentially make whatever they imagine. But to just keep it at object, this is what an object is. So fair enough. Nothing that like is invisible or intangible. Then we have the Transfiguration beam, which is what Majin Buu uses. And we've already talked about this on the show before. Essentially, he can shoot a beam that can turn anything. Well, sorry, it turns his opponent into what he imagines, which this is another one where it's like we could limit it if we want to. It seems like we've seen his candy beam or his transfiguration beam used mainly on like opponents, so like people. And I could see him using it against a robot. Like it would be hard for me to imagine that he couldn't use it against a robot. So I feel like Boo can use it against like most things, but maybe not a city, right? Like we've seen him use it on like a city of people, like all the people in a city, but I don't think we've ever seen Majin Buu like turn an entire city, like the buildings and the roads into candy kind of thing. So you have the Transfiguration beam, which can turn one thing into something else, and the materialization sorcery, which just lets you make something. Like I can visualize it, therefore it can exist. Which is the better ability? Ready, set, go. So just based on like what I can imagine, it seems like there are certain situations in which you would want to have magic materialization and which you would not want to have transfiguration beam right off the bat. So for one, the Transfiguration beam was used against Vegeta in order to turn him into a piece of candy, and it was found that when you get transformed into something, you don't lose your power level. So even though Vegeta was turned into a piece of candy, he was still incredibly strong and able to give Majin Buu a run for his money, essentially beating that ass from here to next week. Whereas it seems like materialization sorcery, I don't really have to worry about a lot. If I need something to stop my opponent, if I can think of what I need, I just have it. Like if there's some bullshit thing that I could use to defeat my opponent, even if you put the limitation of it having to be something that's material, that can be seen and touched, I don't see how this like is never a good option, because if you need people for the Transfiguration beam, right? Like if I have to fire it at someone to make the thing that I need, then it would suck if it's just me and my opponent, and I know that whatever I turn my opponent into, my opponent can still like beat my ass and defeat me. Now we did do a video about the Transfiguration beam versus the Hakai, which is better, because you could imagine empty space, and then your opponent, when you shoot him with the Transfiguration beam, could become empty space, but you can also deflect the Transfiguration beam. So if it was deflected back at you, you would turn into empty space. Materialization sorcery, this also has a beam related thing. As he like fires the beam out of his hand, he creates Gohan's clothes. But the difference here is that you don't have to make it appear on something else, if that makes sense. Like, I don't have to shoot my materialization beam at my opponent. You know, I can shoot it wherever I want the item to appear, or the object to appear, or even the person to appear, because object is very loosely defined as a material thing that can be seen and touched. If you can see yourself, if you're material and you can be touched, then you're an object. And by that understanding of like you being an object, like you could essentially use the materialization beam to make like another individual. You know, like a lot of people think inanimate object like wooden desk or like plastic sunglasses, but there are animate objects, you know, like living things. So magic materialization should allow you to also make things like that. Now, I guess one thing is if you had them face off against each other and they're only allowed to use the transfiguration beam and magic materialization, who would win? I feel like that would be an interesting fight in itself. For one, it seems like magic materialization might take an L if you like put them in a position like this. For example, magic materialization, I can make whatever I want, but then your transfiguration beam can then turn whatever I create into essentially nothing. So you essentially can undo whatever I did. You know, if I make something out of thin air, you could literally make it into thin air, and then I didn't get anywhere. So it seems like the transfiguration beam really can outdo the materialization sorcery, but I don't know. It still seems debatable, but not really. Like the more that I get into it, the more that's like, you could imagine that you could make something with magic materialization in which you set up the properties yourself. So you picture it as being capable of maybe reflecting the transfiguration beam. You know, like that's a part of like what you pictured in your mind. So then when your opponent shoots the transfiguration beam, edit to change it into something else. Oh, wow, what? Got him. And then Majin Buu is turned into that other thing instead. Now you can also use the materialization sorcery on yourself and give yourself clothing that can reflect the transfiguration beam. Because once you've used it on yourself and you made it where you are immune to the transfiguration beam in such a way that whatever you would be turned into, the beam would be reflected back at Buu instead, and they would turn into it, then it seems like that's game. Like you just got him. But you could argue something similar on the Buu side. Buu could use the transfiguration beam to give themselves, I don't know. Honestly, like I was about to say, you could argue it the same way, but that's to argue that you were gonna ever shoot your materialization sorcery at your opponent, but you don't have to. You know, like because of the fact that I don't need an opponent for my move to work, then I can always use my move. Magic materialization can be used to make weapons where there's like no one around for you to have to shoot at them. It can be used to make armor, even if there's nothing around that I have to change into something else. Like transfiguration seems to be objectively worse because of the fact that A, it can be deflected, B, I mean, I'm not saying that the materialization sorcery can't be deflected, but the fact that I don't have to shoot it at you, it makes it way harder for like deflecting to be a thing. There's one thing for you to be shooting your beam directly at me, giving me a chance to deflect it, and me shooting the beam toward myself or even just to the side, because you would have to do like a hard intercept to try and deflect it. And then if I'm shooting it at myself, like you'd have to, the deflection would be even harder. So I could honestly see magic materialization is what the wiki calls it, but the special attack dictionary calls it materialization sorcery. I think materialization sorcery definitely has this one in the bag. Turning someone into something else, like anything you can imagine, is a pretty powerful ability, but being able to like conjure whatever you imagine just by thinking about it, you know, that's also a pretty impressive ability. And I definitely could see where someone would compare these two abilities to one another. and try and fight them off. But it seems like most of the time, in my mind, Materialization Sorcery trumps the Transfiguration Beam. But I'd like to hear, what do you all think? Make sure to post in the comment section below, as I will be reading and replying to all comments. Thank you all once again. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to smash that subscribe button. We're trying to get over 470 subscribers, which is something that we simply cannot do without your help. If you're into these Dragon Ball discussions, as well as Yu-Gi-Oh videos, college lifestyle vlogs, Skullgirls gameplay, Dokkan Battle, etc., etc., then feel free to ring that bell so you'll be notified whenever we do these live streams. Thank you all once again, and have a beautiful night. This is your host, Jet Black, logging out.